Tomorrow evening, Monday, there will be a lecture by Dwight Hopkins. It's the 30th anniversary celebration of Black Catholic ministry in the Diocese of Toledo. So Dr. Hopkins will be right here. I happen to have met him not long ago and had a wonderful conversation. In fact, I had dinner with him, and he's a great guy and a very engaging fellow and a fine scholar. So I want to put in a strong recommendation. That's tomorrow night, right in here. And the lecture, you'll notice, begins at 6:30. And he's written a number of books, and we'll be signing some of those. Everyone's welcome. And then we also, on the next 3 Sunday evenings in October, we have lectures. Dr. Eileen Condon. Eileen's in the back. Eileen, would you stand up, please? I'm not going to introduce you now, but I will do that next week. Eileen will be here, and she's got a great approach. She's the Murray Professor on campus this year of Catholic Thought, and we're really feel good about Eileen's contribution. Glad to have her here. We'll be dedicating the statue of Newman another night. Ted Ross, fine speaker, and then our regular Murray lecturer, Father Robert Imbelli from Boston College, will be here on the 24th. So we have a lot of things coming up here, and you're all welcome, and they're all free. I'll be using this handout, which was produced Friday, so obviously my thought has developed since Friday, so we won't actually be following it totally, I suppose, but it will be a help. I was at a conference in Chicago a few weeks ago, and there were, I don't know, there must have been 150 scholars, theologians, religious studies people, and so on. And I was making comments in a subgrouping of that, and I began talking about the common good. And at one point, one of the Protestant theologians stopped me, and he says, "Well, what do you mean by the common good?" Well, it was a very striking comment to me. What do you mean by the common good? It sort of threw me back. And it took me back to an article by Robert Bella, and which really is the touchstone of this whole presentation that I'm giving. It occurred in the July 31st issue of America. How many people read Robert Bella's articles on religion and the shape of national culture? Let me just get a little feel for this. Yeah, that was the article that started me thinking about this lecture. And in that article, Robert Bella says that looking at our national culture, he said the Protestant Calvinistic outlook has produced important results and done fine things and so on, but it is essentially flawed. And he says the essential flaw in the Protestant deep moral code, as he calls it, is it's too individualistic. It doesn't, and he says it doesn't have a language for the common good. So I'm sitting in a group of largely Protestant theologians and talking about the common good, and he says, "What do you mean by the common good?" Well, it made me think that maybe Bella is on to something here. That, in other words, his point is that we're troubled by individualism in our culture. Excessive individualism. He's written 2 books about that. Habits of the Heart, which a lot of people know, and The Good Society, saying that we're in deep trouble in the United States because we're too zeroed in on doing our own thing, and that there's a sort of type of doctrinaire individualism that says, "Don't mess with me, I'm my own person, and I'm going to do my thing." And another kind of expressive individualism, which he describes, which says that even people who don't think of it in economic terms, I'm a rugged individualist and made a lot of money and I'm a success, but expressive individualism, that is people who said, "I got enough of raising this family, I want to go off and now do my own thing and take up finger painting or do something else that is going to fulfill me." So he says, and what we lost, he says, is a sense of the good of the whole of the community. Now there's some presuppositions in all of that, and there's a history to all of that I want to rehearse. The question in part is it true that sort of Puritan Calvinistic outlook is still at work in our country? Well, I mean, there's a lot of debate about that. Now what we get is the new biography of Reagan, Dutch by Morris. And I haven't finished it yet, but I'm intrigued by it. And I watched him on Larry King, the author, the other night. And he says Reagan never lost his imagination.
President Reagan never lost his imagination, and that imagination was centered on that shining city on a hill. And when the president talked about that shining city on a hill, it was taken from the Puritan tradition, the early tradition, and I began to think, well, maybe it's true that there is some deep cultural code that's at work in the United States culture that continues on today. Shaped by Puritanism, as I say here, shaped surely by the Enlightenment, the deism of people like Thomas Jefferson, shaped by the individualism of the 19th century, utilitarianism, what works is what counts, and the consumerism of the 20th century. I'm going to sort of buy my way into happiness and so on. So we do have in our founding surely a waspish culture. The Protestant Calvinistic outlook was important, and it's helped produce the country as we know it. Oh, that keep your nose to the grindstone, work hard, cleanliness is next to godliness. All that's helped produce the affluence and wealth that we've got in this country. Now the question is then, where does the Catholic community fit into all of this? And I must say that Robert Bella, who I'm bouncing off of here, was raised as a Presbyterian, and he's an Episcopalian now. He's not a Catholic. And in no way do I want this to be, triumphalism, a new triumphalism for Catholicism, the Catholic moment. We had enough of that before the Council, and I really don't want to do that. And it's not in any way a put-down of the Protestant imagination, the Protestant approach, and so on. It just has nothing to do with that in my own mind. It's bouncing off of this analysis by Robert Bella, who himself is a Protestant now practicing as an Episcopalian. So where the Catholics fit in? Well, pretty clear that, before 1820, we were just a tiny group, minority group in the United States, and really inconsequential, largely persecuted. There was a Toleration Act in Maryland in 1647, I think it was, that said Catholics could practice their religion in Maryland. But then, beginning in 1820 and all the way to 1920, we had this vast wave of immigration. 33 million Catholics came to this country. First the Irish and the Germans, and then later on the Eastern Europeans, the Italians, came here to this country. And they came in and had to deal with what we often call the nativist prejudice. The idea that these were interlopers and didn't belong in this Protestant country here in the United States. Irish need not apply for jobs. A lot of discrimination and so on that many of our ancestors knew here in this country. So we go along in the 19th century, and it's just sort of a matter of survival, like and a ghettoized attitude. We're going to build our own schools, protect ourselves. If our kids are going to go off to university, we got to be careful they won't be taken in with this free thinking and so on. But there were counter strains in there, which is important. And the great figure that represents that is Isaac Hecker, the founder of the policy. Lived 1819 to 1898, so he spanned the 19th century. And Hecker had a different idea. He said, there's a lot of good in this American culture here. We don't have to be just defensive and off by ourselves. There's a lot of good in this culture, and if we could get a Catholic outlook into this Calvinistic country, then we would be terrific. We really would be a light to the nations, and we would be a great country. And so he encouraged Catholic lay people to get involved in the politics and the economics of the times and to bring their faith to bear, lay people, bring their faith to bear upon the life here in the United States. Well, in 1899, Hecker's ideas by then had gotten known in Europe, and Pope Leo XIII condemned what he then called Americanism. And he saw that it was a response to Isaac Hecker. And he said, this idea of baptizing American culture is all wrong. You're going to fall into religious indifferentism. This capitalistic system is selfish. And you're going to end up losing the faith. Catholics will lose their faith in the United States if they follow this Americanist heresy. Americanism, as represented by these ideas of Isaac Hecker, that we should get involved in the culture and that this culture is really good. Well, Cardinal Gibbons, the great leader, all the way up till after the First World War, he died in 1921. Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore, when they received this encyclical or pastoral letter from the Pope condemning Americanism, he says, I don't know anybody who holds that. He called it Americanism the phantom heresy, like it didn't exist here in the United States, because we were hunkered down in the Catholic community and doing our own thing and building our own schools and weren't in danger of this relativism from the culture. Well, after the time of Gibbons, or late in his career, the bishops did begin to speak out and take an active role and say, well, we live in this country. I mean, see, Catholics didn't do much like the abolitionist movement in the Civil War time. I mean, we were just sort of living here. We weren't leaders in that. We weren't leaders in getting women's voting rights. But in 1919, our bishops did a tremendous thing. They wrote this program of social reconstruction. They entered the debate in the United States and saying that, we got to protect children in the laboring market. We need something like Social Security. We need minimum wage. We need to help people who are out of jobs and all that. That was written by Monsignor John Ryan, who was called Monsignor New Dealer. So we recognize that as FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. They called him Monsignor New Dealer. He wrote that 1919 thing, and much of what the bishops called for in 1919 became part of the public policy of the United States that we still have today. Well, as we move through the 20th century then, Protestants began to get worried about us because there's so many of us. People remember the name Paul Blanchard? Paul Blanchard wrote and said that Catholics can never be good Americans. They can't be trusted in the United States because they have allegiance to the Pope. Their first allegiance is to Rome, therefore they cannot be good members of this American culture of ours. We labored with that all the way up to the time of John Kennedy. If you remember his famous talk before the Houston Ministerial Association in 1959, that was a great charge. How you couldn't have a Catholic president of the United States, that's ridiculous. And Kennedy went to the Houston Ministerial Association and said essentially, my Catholic faith has absolutely nothing to do with the way I function as president. Absolutely nothing. A total dichotomy between my Catholic faith and how I would function as president. That was the essential message. And it was part of what helped get him elected. That speech to the Houston Ministerial Association. I forgot to mention Christian Century, well-known, respected public Protestant publication, in 1944 carried a series of articles saying that how the Catholics were plotting to take over, essentially, and how we were infiltrating the whole culture. Well, John Kennedy got elected. The Catholics fought in the Second World War, came back through the GI Bill, went to college in numbers beyond our representation of the population, and have now moved into the mainstream. We've now become the most affluent people in the United States. Well, and I quote some of these statistics here someplace in these notes about Catholics now at the center of power. Through the last 15 years or so, we've gone to college, Catholics. We're about 25% of the population. We've gone to college some years as much as 39% of the collegiate population. It's now down to about 31%. That means that we're getting more and more educated and getting more and more affluent. So if you factor out the 1/4 of the Hispanic Catholics in the United States who have not yet made it in the mainstream, we are the most affluent people around. German Catholics, Polish Catholics, Irish Catholics now enjoy great power and wealth in the United States. In Congress, we've outnumbered, usually most Congresses, the House of Representatives, outnumbered the other highest denomination by 2 or 3 to 1. We got more CEOs than any other religious group. We've always been strong in the labor unions. We're moving up now in terms of presidents of universities. So the point is we're at the center of power. And a larger point is, what do we do once we're there? Does it make any difference that we had all these Catholic CEOs? Does it make any difference that Catholics now have all this money and affluence and power in the United States? And what ought we do about all of that? So that is sort of my attempt to at least sketch out some history here as we try to answer this question about the Catholic moment as we're describing it. Now, that phrase, incidentally, comes from another Protestant, Richard Newhouse, who was a Lutheran pastor in 1987, as I said here, wrote a book called The Catholic Moment, making the same sort of claim that there was a unique opportunity for Catholics to make a contribution to the public debate here in the United States. So I'm borrowing that phrase from him. He is now a convert to Catholicism, by the way, and one of what we call the neoconservatives. So now we look at U.S. culture, which is pluralistic as all get out, many strains. I mean, there's dominant culture and all different kind of strains. Hard to get a hold of that. And then we're looking at the Catholic community. Now, for much of our history, we were unified because we were in the defensive. So whenever you're on the defensive, you got to have a unified front to fight against the nativist prejudice, to try to make it in this culture. We got to hang together. So we papered over all the differences. And when we went into the Second Vatican Council in the early 60s, a lot of Catholics said, well, why are we having a council? We don't need one because all Catholics think the same anyway. And it was William Buckley who wrote the first column that I think shattered that viewpoint of many Catholics. It was when Pope John XXIII did his encyclical Mater et Magistra, and he said, Mater si, Magistra no. In other words, the church is my mother, that's right, but I don't buy this teaching of John XXIII. It's too liberal for me, William Buckley. And that for many Catholics was the first time we recognized that we didn't all think the same. And then Xavier Rin kept writing these articles during the council and telling us, well, there's liberals and conservatives. There are? I remember writing in the early 60s a definitive article on this question saying the council would do nothing in particular because all the bishops thought the same anyway. I did that while I was in the seminary. Now we got all these groups. And it's hard to sort it all out. I tried to take, I'm borrowing here from Avery Dullison, adding some more things, but and number 2 in the introduction, just if you're, I'm up to number 2. So number 2 in the introduction tries to sketch out these various groups that we might see in relationship to U.S. culture. One would be liberals or progressives. Some people, Richard McBrien might be a key figure here. Influenced a lot by my own mentor, Carl Rahner, who's back there on the wall, baptismal figure. And here, the dominant word is transformation. When you read all these people, what they write, influenced by Rahner, their word is transformation. What Catholics got to do is try to transform the culture. We got to try to make it better in various ways, improve it, transform the culture. They also incidentally think that people in the church should learn something from the culture, especially about democracy and freedom. So these people tend to say we need more democracy in the church, more freedom, more rights for women. Oh, so the liberal kind of approach. Then the neoconservatives represented by Novak and Newhouse and George Weigel. We've had them here speaking. Michael Novak's been here a number of times this last year. And their great word for looking at this relationship between the church and the culture is paradox. Now it's a paradoxical situation. They want the church, first of all, they think that the democratic capitalistic system is terrific. You know, Michael Novak will talk about the capitalistic system as the kingdom of God on earth, and the new managerial class as being the great apostles of the kingdom and so on. I once said to Michael that I thought he would be a lot more credible if he ever issued one sort of critique of our economic system. And I don't think he's done that since I gave him that advice many years ago. So the neoconservatives tend to sort of baptize that part of the culture, but where the paradoxical thing is in the cultural realm, the moral cultural realm, and here they think we're really out of line. Secularism has taken over in this country. We have a culture of death. Abortion represents that. And somehow or another, we Catholics, and this is Newhouse's point, we Catholics have to form a public philosophy that's going to enable us to produce a gospel of life in this country. My homily this weekend was borrowed from the neoconservatives that way. That's part of the message. We have to find a language and argumentation to defend the unborn, to speak against abortion that other people in the culture will understand. That was the project of John Courtney Murray. We Catholics have a unique opportunity to shape the public debate. As Newhouse says, because liberal Protestantism, which has been the dominant force in the United States all this time, has lost its power, lost its energy, and so now it's our turn, the Catholic community, to shape this public philosophy, this consensus that will enable us to deal better with the life issues. And then there are the liberationists. I'd say Dorothy Day. I'll say more about them, I think, later on. But their big thing is that we'll find in our culture institutional evil, systemic sinfulness, that there's things that are just fundamentally wrong in the structures of things. So that we get a lot of talk about sexism and the glass ceiling, and that women not having opportunity in the culture and getting paid less than men for similar work. And that this is part of the old boys network, part of the way we organize ourselves. So they want to transform the structures of evil. And then comes the one that I've been most influenced by lately, in this book, Heart of the World, Center of the Church, by David Schindler. There was a review of it in the New Republic, calling it the most important Catholic or religious text, I think, in a number of years. And I will talk about this a little bit. And I don't have good words for this. We often call this line of thought ressourcement theology, or communio is their big word. And again, this all comes from the theology of Hans Urs von Balthasar, and I will say more about that as we go along. And then there are the traditionalists, who say that we live in this bad culture, and death-dealing culture, secularized culture, and that the only way to handle this is to get back to a Catholicism like we had before the Council, that was rock solid, that was monolithic, that held the line, that spoke out clearly on all these issues. So we had to get back to an old-style Catholicism to fight against these cultural trends. So the point is, Catholic community is pluralistic. Whether that's the best way to divide it up, I really don't know. A lot of other authors do it in other ways, and we could deal with that in a discussion time, I suppose. But that's one way to think of how we are pluralistic today. In other words, not everyone agrees in the Catholic community about how are you a good citizen of this country. Don't even agree on what the problem is. We don't even agree on how to work it all out. Now, with that in mind, I want to turn to a number of specific issues and try to make this, I hope, more concrete. So I am now on Roman numeral 2, individualism and the common good. And I'm back to Bella's article, and what he is talking about there and the great problem of individualism in our culture, and that it's keeping us from functioning well. He quotes in there Robert Wuthnow, and he's got a book out called Loose Connections. And his point is that in the United States, the average person is not rooted. The average person is walking around wanting to do their own thing and has very loose connections with any organizations, including the church. So we see this with, in our young people today, almost a total lack of loyalty to the church. I mean, people have heard me talk about this before. I mean, I might be having a wedding of really exemplary Catholics, say, with a Protestant person, and they've come to church here every weekend, their whole collegiate career, and they're faithful Catholic and been involved in the church, and they will tell me something like this: well, when we move to a new city, if we can't find a good Catholic church like this one here, well, we'll look around at the Lutheran church or the Presbyterian church or whatever we might find. In other words, that's what he means by loose connections. It's not just, it's loose in every which way. I mean, and porous institutions, he says. The institutions don't have the power to hold people. First of all, the family. So every time we have a wedding, we're thinking half of the marriages are going to end up in divorce. Jobs. People used to work for a corporation for many years and have stability there, and they knew they're going to retire and have a good pension, and now people are moving out of jobs, and people are downsizing, losing their jobs, and all of that. So this all leads, all this analysis ends up leading to saying that people have a private religious piety, me and God, and the evangelical Christian outlook reinforces that. If you accepted Jesus as your personal Savior, do you have a personal relationship to Jesus? Oh, there was very little sense of church, very little sense of the communal dimension of all of that. And we have these loose connections with any institution, and the institutions can't sort of engage our loyalty and keep us on board. Now, Bella, at the end of his article, says something about, in the midst of all this, the Protestant world does not have a language of the common good. We're not sure what that means. And it's not their ordinary way of speaking. Their ordinary way of speaking is my personal relationship with Jesus. And he says the Catholic tradition has this, and it could help us. But I must say at the end of the article, Bella is very pessimistic. He doesn't really think it's going to happen. He says it would take something like a major depression in the United States before we would ever get out of our lethargy and see the importance of this notion of holding together and caring for one another and seeing the importance of creating this common good where we can all flourish as human beings. Bella really ends up being pessimistic. It isn't going to happen unless we get a big crisis. And then people are going to say, what are we going to do? We better huddle together. We better worry about one another again. We better find common bonds. Now, takes us back then to this Catholic sensibility, the Catholic imagination. And is it really different from the Protestant imagination? It was Chesterton who said that everybody in the United States is Protestant, even Catholics. In other words, that was the melting pot theory. After you lived here enough in this country, you became like everybody else. If you were in Rome and working, you took the afternoon off. Took a nap. Closed the shop down. If you're in Catholic countries, it was sensible to take a nap in the afternoon. But once you came to the United States, you worked all day long. You became just like the Calvinists. And your house had to be just as clean and neat as your Protestant neighbor, or maybe more so. Or we had to be more loyal than anyone else. We saw that during the Joseph McCarthy era. We had to be more anti-communist, more American than anybody else. We had to prove it. So is there anything distinctive left about being Catholic in the country? That's a hard question. And I must say I personally vacillate on it. But I do think that with others, that if we probe deeply enough, we do find some distinctive differences. And one of it might well be that the Catholic imagination is more communal. So our real sense is, at some deep level, is that we get socialized into the church. We don't just go found our own church. That's what Bella praises up Roger Williams, the Puritan thing, as being the great example of what happens. So if you don't like what's going on in this colony, you go to another colony. If you don't like what's going on in that colony, you found your own little group inside of it. And then if you don't like that, then you get a smaller group. And Roger Williams came down to having his own church, which consisted of him, his wife, and one other person. And you know, Robert Bella talked in his book Habits of the Heart about Sheilaism. He interviewed Sheila. And Sheila had her own religion. Well, she made it all up. She had a little bit here, a little bit there. She had her own religion, Sheilaism. Well, that's how individualistic you get. So somewhere deep in our bones, Catholic bones, it says that isn't how it is. We're socialized into a religion. We're baptized as a baby, and we're supposed to make that part of ourselves, and that's in our bones and blood. And you can't just leave and start your own religion. What you ought to do is stay and make it better. And surely there's still some Catholics around. I was at my class reunion, and it was really inspiring to me how many people came up to me and talked about the fact they were still loyal to their parish. They've still been at this parish for many years, still in the church, still go to Mass every week, and they have that sense of loyalty to the church. They've kept it all these years. What is that, for 25 years now? They've kept it since we graduated. It's incredible. Sense of loyalty. So, Andy really likes to say there's a Catholic imagination, and it's shaped by the Eucharist. It's shaped by Mass. So we come to Mass, we're praying as a group, and it's a communal celebration, and we're all in it together, and we all have to give a little. We might not exactly agree with everything that's being said, but we go along with it. We say yes to the whole thing as a group activity, and that shapes our outlook as Catholics and gives us this communal sense. We're saved as a people.
No, I mean, when I think about that, I think there is still something like that we have, that we can hold on to and can make our own and to live with and to make a difference. Now, how does one go about all of that? I think the family is the key for us. Now, where does this sense of the common good? I think it comes in the family. I think we pass it on. I mean, we're going to make this contribution to the culture, right? There's a Catholic movement. We got a culture that's too individualistic. It's making things bad. We're not functioning well. Got to get this sense of common good. And we Catholics are supposed to do it. How do we do it? Well, one way we do it, I think, is through the family. And we do it when parents, just by example, show their kids that they're involved in the community. And Catholics do it when they are helping the Red Cross. When their kids see that they're involved in some civic organization. When they're trying to improve the larger community. They give part of their time to the common good. The kids see that and they recognize it and they begin to drink it in. I think it happens in families when kids are taught not to be selfish. Simple way not to be selfish. That, no, what you're supposed to do for others. This isn't just do whatever you feel like doing here. This isn't what our family's all about. You must cooperate. You have to help one another. We're in this together. Don't just go do your own thing. You have to take into consideration all the other people here in this family. So we say, how do we make our contribution if it's true that there's a Catholic imagination that senses the importance of the common good? I think it starts right in that setting. That's where we would want to work. Families. Kids learning that their parents aren't just in it to make money. They're not just in it for their own selves, but they sense they got to put some of their time and energy into making the world a better place, into helping other people. Reach out. So every time parents do something to help a neighbor, every time parents do something to improve the community, I think we are passing on this Catholic sensibility about the common good. Well, that could be expanded in a lot of different ways, but I think that perhaps makes the point. Then, moving now beyond Bella's article, and taking that line of thought, what else is it in the culture that isn't going right, and that we could do good with? That the Catholic voice is important. And I take up this next notion of consumerism here. And my analysis is largely from David Schindler in his book, Heart of the World, Center of the Church. And Schindler is the great proponent of the theology of Hans Urs von Balthasar. In the Catholic world in the 20th century, there's three major gigantic figures. One is Karl Rahner, my own mentor. Another is Bernard Lonergan, who is very similar to Rahner. And then another person who's very different, Hans Urs von Balthasar, who was a friend of Rahner, and they collaborated, and they're about the same age. They were both Jesuits, and they're working together on a common project of how you relate Catholicism to the modern world. And at some point in that whole process, Balthasar said, this doesn't make any sense. This project is essentially flawed. I'm out of here. Became friends with a woman, Adrian von Speyer, a mystic, and he left the Jesuits and founded his own religious group along with Adrian von Speyer and wrote these wonderful volumes about Catholicism and so on, all centered on the notion of beauty. Beauty became his major category. We've got to make the faith beautiful. We have to show how Christ reflects the glory of the Lord. And Balthasar was not into accommodation. In other words, he didn't think like Rahner would say, well, we could learn a lot from Eastern meditation techniques. Balthasar says, forget it, not learning from Eastern religions. Balthasar was very strict. I mean, he was against women's ordination. Said he had an essential argument why women could not be ordained. Balthasar's great influence on Cardinal Ratzinger in the church. He's made a cardinal near the end of his life. He was ready to be made a cardinal. So Balthasar just took a very different approach to of how we're supposed to do theology today and how Catholicism should be shaped and how it should interact with culture. Now, up till now, it's been hard to figure out what this means about living in the United States. Balthasar was Swiss and did all of his work in German and so on. His work's only being translated now. We have it in our library, by the way, as it's coming out. So this David Schindler comes along, and he's sort of the great proponent of Balthasar's thought, and writes this book, Heart of the World, Center of the Church, in which he takes his stab at what would this mean for Catholics living in the United States? How would we function? And according to his analysis of what's wrong with our culture is essentially that we have forgotten that we are recipients of God's love. It's coming back to love. Love is at the center of it all. And what we've done in our culture is to put all the emphasis on acquiring, on having, on achieving, on being number one, on the success ethic. I use that line in my homily this week. Balthasar once said, success is not a name of God. Success is not a name of God. In other words, Balthasar said, forget all this success stuff. Forget this affluence, you know. The problem is that we have not thought of ourselves just as graced recipients of God's love, valuable because we exist, and we put all the emphasis on what we've accomplished. And we've acquired things. That's how I know I'm important, because I wrote 3 books or something. No, that's where my importance comes from. Balthasar and Schindler say that gets us all off the track. And so they're very critical of the United States culture. They say, yeah, it's true, 94% of people say they believe in God, and over 90% of the people in the culture pray, and on any given weekend, 40% of us are in church or synagogue or in a mosque, but that there's nothing of substance of it. So Schindler will say right out that people in the United States, corrupted as we are by this culture, are practical atheists. So he says that we're walking around saying we believe in God, but our behavior doesn't show it, that we are essentially atheistic in the way we act.
dominantly in the United States culture. So their response to this is this communio approach. We translate that Latin word often as communion or solidarity. And so they say that we'll never solve our cultural problems until we start thinking in a totally different way. We have to start with this communion idea. God in the Trinity is a communion. It's a dynamic relationship of Father, Son, and Spirit. They have a communion of love. And Christ takes that to us, brings that to us, and sets up a communion of all the human beings. So we live in solidarity with one another. And for Balthasar and Schindler, the great figure of all this is Mary. Mary, all Catholic spirituality is Marian, he says. It's all based on Mary because the essential of Catholic spirituality is the fiat. Be it done to me according to your will. It's a receptive spirituality. This gets really hard to explain. It's why he thinks women can't be priests, essentially. He thinks that well, I'm going to get into trouble here trying to explain this. Men, see, the relationship he always sets up is between masculine active and feminine passivity. Now, that's going to throw a lot of people in a room. That's what he writes. I mean, I'm quoting now. You know, and he set up that way so that in relationship to Christ, the church is feminine. The church is Marian. It's receptive of the grace of Christ. He's masculine active. Priests represent Christ. Therefore, only males can properly represent Christ to be this giver of the grace of the love of Christ to the rest of the community. That's somewhat, they call it the iconic argument. That's the argument that why women cannot be priests, because they can't represent the leadership in the church, which is giving to the rest of the people who are feminine receptive in relationship to Christ. Now, I'm sure that it wouldn't be hard for some people to mount a rather strong critique of that particular theology. But this is where, they want to put the emphasis here. We've got, in other words, it gets back to this. I got to see that I'm important because I've received my being from God. God has given me love. Christ has loved me. God has first loved us. We've received this love from the great God. We are in a passive, dependent position, and our response should be fiat. Let it be done to me according to your will. That's where they think it has to happen. So they are very critical of those neoconservatives who want us to get in there and create a public philosophy and find a language that the culture will recognize. See, that's what Balthasar never liked about Rahner. Rahner always said we have to make the message relevant. We have to say it in words that people understand. We can't just walk around saying we're against abortion. You got to find a language that the secular people in the country would understand. That's Rahnerian type thinking. We have to correlate the message with the culture. Find a way to say it so people can understand it and appreciate it. And Balthasar says, forget it. That isn't the way you go about it. It isn't going to work. So they want the church to be the church. Stand up and model for the rest of the country how receptive love looks. How does a receptive, loving community look? Model it, be it. I'm sort of thinking maybe the right word is 11. That the church should be 11 in society. So that other people, as they did in the early church, say, look at those people, see how they love one another. And then they'll say, this is good. Therefore, we should love one another more and take care of one another more. Not be worried about just making money, but caring for one another. I think that's the project as they see it. I use the language job is not simply to shape a public philosophy. They say, who cares? Anybody can talk about a public philosophy. We preach Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Embrace the world in love so it's not suffocated by making money, not suffocated by technology or by power. Well, I never liked this idea of power. See, you start out and say, Catholics are now at the center of power. What are we going to do? And their response to that is, probably get rid of the power. Forget the power. Power's got nothing. Power's no good. Love is what counts. Well, that's the kind of critique that I think you get from Schindler as representing the theology of Balthasar. Schindler very opposed to capitalism, and Novak's lauding of capitalism. He says that Christianity and capitalism are incompatible, and so on. Mutual self-interest, which is based on, creates wealth, but spiritual poverty. Then I got that line from Balthasar, success is not a name of God. But he'll say, I don't want to go back on what we've gained. Otherwise, he says, we got freedom in this country. I like it. He enjoys it. We got affluence. We feed people more than anyone's ever fed people in the history of the world. We've got, I do a better job of that than anybody else. He doesn't want to go back on that. You might find a little contradiction here. In other words, he says the whole thing's a mess, but thank goodness we got it in a way. Because it's making this life better for more people. So he doesn't want to go back, but he thinks the way forward is some other path. Now, what does all that mean for us in this culture and how we would try to function? Well, I'd like to put forward Dorothy Day, Catholic worker movement, as exemplifying what these people are talking about. I always love it that they sell the Catholic worker for still 1 penny. That's countercultural. That's this ideal put into practice. Catholic workers, living with the poor, loving the poor, taking care of them, doing it on a day-to-day basis, living with those smelly bodies, as Dorothy Day said. Now, I mean, is that how Catholics are going to make the contribution to the Catholic worker movement? Well, I think that's something good we've done in our culture.
Well, David O'Brien says Dorothy Day is the most influential Catholic in the history of the United States. And maybe it has had an influence. You know, it's influenced all kind of people like Michael Harrington and people who are now secularized and so on. But they've been influenced by her, by that movement. What about other ways? How about someone who says, I'm not going to take this promotion at work because it would take me away from time with my family. So I'm going to spend more time with my family and not move to Brazil, the next line of promotion in my company. Maybe that's the way to do it. How about students who say, well, I can make a lot more money in this field, but I'm going to go into social work because I want to help people. Maybe that's an example of what we're talking about here. How about people who change careers? I think of people I know who said, you know, I'm really successful and affluent and now, but I want to spend my time doing something which has greater social relevance, greater ways of helping others. How about retired people who say they're going to now, in one way or another, try to do good in the community, volunteer more, and go out and make the world a little bit better? My father, after he retired, went out and helped out at the Sunshine Home. Well, my brother was one of the first persons in the Sunshine Home. My father built a sandbox for the kids out there. So maybe there's ways in which one acts against consumerism in the culture out of Catholic conviction that really does begin to make a difference in the culture as a whole. I better do these others a little more rapidly. You're sure you're an expert on time management, they said to him. Next one I took up was this sort of anti-intellectualism, problem of religious illiteracy, relativism in the culture, subjectivism, no standards, one thing's as good as another. We don't understand the roots of our culture. We don't appreciate the life of the mind. We think intellectuals are out of it, live in ivory towers, unconnected with the real world, don't have a knowledge of a faith in order to critique the violence in the culture or the consumerism and so on. Well, in response, truly, Catholic tradition here is strong. We've always recognized the life of the mind as being a gift from God. Our great theologians have always used the secular culture of the time, just as Aquinas, a great example of using the philosophy of Aristotle in order to show and bring together the various strains of the Catholic heritage. My own teacher, Karl Rahner, made use of the philosophy of Heidegger in his own work. We've always said that we should enter into dialogue with science. We're not the ones pushing creationism in the schools. We recognize that evolution is a theory that developed by the scientific world, that it doesn't contradict what's in the book of Genesis. It's not a problem for us Catholics like it is for evangelical Protestants. We recognize that grace is at work in the culture, that scientists do a lot of good things for us. All of that, part of our Catholic sense. The mind is important. Theology is a good thing. Dialogue is the way we learn. We can learn from the culture as well as try to transform it. There's an intelligible order in the world. That's our natural law tradition. And the human mind can see it, learn about it, find out about it. That's why we can dialogue on the abortion question with people who disagree with us. It's possible at least to think of persuasive arguments that people would say, yeah, that makes sense to me. We do have to protect the unborn or we're going to get into trouble in various ways. Well, how are we going to get that Catholic sensibility out there? We did one really good thing at this university. We founded a professorship in Catholic thought. And we're doing another good thing by we're turning it in now into a full chair in Catholic thought. That is a good thing, and we've tried to spread it around the country. And so the State University of Iowa at Ames has done it, and the University of Illinois at Chicago have been inspired by what we did here, and we're getting Catholic chairs established around the country. That's one way we take this Catholic heritage and put it into practice. People do it by supporting Catholic education. I think of the tremendous sacrifices Catholics have made, send their kids to Catholic grade schools, Catholic high schools, Catholic colleges. That's part of this whole approach. All of our efforts to improve our theology departments at universities, and we have made good progress in the last number of years. All the people who try to educate themselves about their Catholic faith, people who come to lectures like this, read books, try to keep their mind alive. Teachers, professors who teach students to think, to critically look at their heritage, and who will not accept simply, well, I feel this way, or I'm comfortable with that, and who will insist on some sort of rigorous thinking. All those ways I see Catholic community as contributing to overcome the anti-intellectualism that we find in the culture. And then I take up the culture wars, so to speak. There's a lot of argument about whether that's the best way to think about it, talk about it. Does seem to be, as our Pope says, a creeping culture of death that we have to deal with in the United States, and we have to try to respond to that. I use the neoconservatives here, Novak and Weigel and Newhouse, to try to show one way of going about all of this, trying to fight the culture of death and promote the gospel of life, as our Pope talks about it. We probably would do that by trying to create this consensus. Remember, this is the neoconservatives. Now we're in a different ballpark. I'm using them as my model here. And they're the ones who say we have to come up with this public philosophy. That's what John Courtney Murray said. In the United States, for years, we had a public philosophy, a consensus among most people of how we should live in this country. And that's what's been broken down. And then that leads to the violence. And then that leads to abortion. And that leads to poor policies and so on. So that, how are we going to affect this? Well, that's one way the Catholic Church does it, is have Respect Life Sunday, like we just had this weekend. Respect life. We had it in Cardinal Bernardin's talking about the consistent ethic of life. We have it whenever people try to help a young woman who's pregnant and isn't sure if she wants to carry her baby to term and come forward and give her support and help. We do it that way. So that as Cardinal Bernardin says, we make our opposition to abortion credible by having care for life, by trying to improve the quality of life. And finally here, I take up the question of meaning in Catholic spirituality. Here the cultural problem is, as I see it, superficiality, trivialization. We have sound bites that take up major issues. We got fads in spirituality. Every week there's a new book out, a new fad of how we're going to become more whole people or more fulfilled, pull your own strings, the sky's the limit, all kind of stuff from popular psychology and so on. And in the midst of all of that, we often get a divorce between religion and spirituality. So for many people, especially our young people today, spirituality is a good word. They like that. I want to be spiritual. But it has nothing to do with religion. Religion, you come to church, you go to Mass, and it doesn't mean much to me. I do it maybe, but that is where I get my spirituality. I get it elsewhere. Some people say they get it from AA meetings. They get it from their divorce group. They get it from reading pop psychology. So we got a spiritual thing, a spiritual thirst in the country, and it's deep, I believe, and the bookstores will represent that, and the people are searching it out, but very often it's got nothing to do with religion. Religion is seen as a series of dogmas, strange rituals, creeds that don't touch the heart. And so we created a massive problem for ourselves. And part of the question is, can the Catholic community help to overcome this problem? In essence, we've got a rich spiritual tradition. We've got the resources that the culture needs. We do. We've got the saints. You know, our young collegians don't know about the saints. They don't. I spent a semester with our collegians and using one of my books that talks about a number of the saints, and I think a number were interested in it because they had never heard of those people before. They're the holy people that found spiritual ways to answer the call of God. So we need to recover some of that sense. I said there's a lot, but my tagline is something like that. People want to get into meditation, so they spend $125 to take TM and to get a mantra. And out of the Catholic tradition, I can teach it to people in 3 minutes for nothing. Well, it's right there in our Catholic tradition. It's in the Jesus Prayer, for example. The monks taught us that a long time ago. The Eastern Church has kept it alive. It's all part of it. And we've lost it. And people don't know about it. And the clergy have done a poor job of passing it on. It's like when they came to me for spiritual direction, I said, well, why don't you go to your pastor? And she says, well, I did go ask him for help, and he says, I'm not into that sort of thing. Well, I mean, that's more sad than anything else. It's sad. I'm not into that sort of thing. Well, I mean, what are we into if we're not into that? So we've got it. That's the thing. It's rich and powerful. It's diverse. It's pluralistic. It shows us how to come closer to God, to deepen the spiritual life, to find peace, to find energy. We've got prayer forms, centering prayer, and Lectio Divina, ways of reading the Scriptures, and nobody knows about it. Maybe we'll make that our next best-kept secret. In fact, the Catholic community has rich spiritual resources. We don't just have dogmas and rituals and institutional life. It's all that is for the purpose of enriching the Spirit, bringing us closer to Christ, having us put on the mind of Christ, being more responsive to the Spirit. I mean, how are we going to do that? Bishop Otner, I admire greatly up in Saginaw, one Lent. What he did is he had materials prepared on different forms of prayer for each of the Sundays of Lent. And he sent it out to all the parishes and asked them to preach on that every week and pass out this material. So in the Saginaw Diocese at the end of Lent, you couldn't say, I never heard of centering prayer, or I don't know what Lectio Divina, reading the Scriptures in a meditative way, is all about. It was all there. 6 different ways that Catholics pray out of our tradition. So I like that. That was a way of saying to all the whole diocese have got this tradition, and don't walk around saying you have to leave the church in order to become holy, or to learn how to pray, or to meditate. Well, we have this tradition. I'm involved in an effort with Tom Murray, who was the first donor of our chair and professor in Catholic thought, of trying to do something with television, to get the message of Catholicism out through television. When we look at the history of this period, the historians are going to say, I can't believe this. The Catholic bishops totally blew it. We had this wonderful medium. We could get into the homes of everybody in the United States, and we don't have it. And one sister, with I think 6 people in her order, has her own cable. Mother Angelica. And the historians will say, I don't believe this. The bishops missed this opportunity. Television is the way you get the message across. That's what shapes people today. Television is how where everyone learns. That's where it's at. And we're zero total loss in the Catholic community for all these years. If it's the Catholic movement, that way we lost it. Well, my friend Tom Murray is interested in overcoming that. And we've had some really interesting meetings with big people in the television world, like people like Ron Miesiger, who produced the halftimes of the Super Bowl. I mean, how big can you get? Ron Miesiger produced halftimes, more than one, of the Super Bowl. And another fellow who produced soap operas for years. And we're talking to people about, and there's going to be a new Catholic cable coming out of New York, maybe by next Easter. And how do you produce creative Catholic programming to get the message across to people who don't come to lectures? Our young people don't come to lectures. They learn from television, they learn from videos, they learn from images. We're the book people here. I make outlines. Ron Miesiger produces halftime shows. So what Tom Murray and I are interested in doing is figuring out how to get these creative people who do daytime television and soap operas and get them to find a little more about the Catholic tradition and to produce television programs that will get this message out. Part of what I think has to happen. Well, that's all by way of preparing for Eileen Condon's lecture next week, where she's going to use movies and to talk about confession. Eileen, somebody who understands what I just said, not just cerebrally, but in her guts. She knows about images and all of that, and out of her training as a folklorist. Knows how those images touch us, how the symbols get in our mind and heart. So, we're back to Robert Bella's article. Robert Bella says that it's a Catholic movement in a way. It's a Catholic opportunity. The culture is messed up in a lot of ways. A lot of good things. I mean, I'm so much more Reinerian, as you know. I mean, Reiner says, let's look at the culture and say what's good in it and what's bad. Not just a blanket condemnation about everything about the United States is bad, like some people want to do. But Reiner says, no, you enter into conversation with the culture. You talk to Ron Miesiger and see what you can do. You learn from what the scientists are saying, what the philosophers are saying, what all the people with power in the culture. You learn from them. I think from a Reinerian viewpoint, power is not a bad thing. Affluence is not a bad thing. It allows you to do good things. It allows you to make a difference in the world. So I now bring out my own outlook on this. I'm with Uncle Carl, back down the wall. Got to be co-relational. Got to talk to the culture, learn from the culture. And in doing that, we have to be dialectical. That is, we want to say yes to U.S. culture. We promote freedom. We got religious liberty. We can go to church and worship. That's good. In our culture, people say, let's get fulfilled. Let's get actualized. Let's develop our potential. And we say out of the gospel, that's good. That's what God wants us to, develop our talents. But there are things in the culture that are destructive. And there is 1.5 million abortions is a bad thing. Bad, evil, wrong. And consumerism is not healthy. Makes unhappy people, produces depression. Individualism is not the way the human community ought to function. We should have solidarity. We ought to be together. So we have to be able to say no to those kinds of things in the culture. And Bella ends up being really pessimistic that we Catholics probably won't get it together. We probably won't meet the challenge. We probably won't make a difference. And I'm on the other side of that. I think we got opportunities. I think there's ways in which we're making some progress. And I think there's other ways in which we can do better as a community, in simple ways. Parents teaching their kids responsibility for the common good. Little ways of fighting consumerism. Ways of promoting the intellectual heritage of Catholicism. And ways in which we develop our own personal spirituality. Rooted in the Catholic tradition, it gives us strength to carry on and make a difference in this culture of ours. Let's take a 2-minute stand-up break, and then we'll have the opportunity for responses and questions. Right, can I have your attention, please? We're open to comments, questions, responses. Mike?
I mean, basically, talk about the American Catholic position of power CEOs, government. You really see it really changing culture. If you look at, say, how many CEOs in America who are Catholic, sweatshops in Latin America, Southeast Asia, are Catholic politicians openly support abortion, and definitely,
yeah. Well, yeah, Mike is saying that, painting the darker side of it and saying, well, we've got CEOs of corporations that run sweatshops, and we've got politicians, Catholic politicians supporting abortion, etc. And all of that is certainly true. It highlights the fact that
in my mind, that we haven't done the job that we need to do, or we haven't sensed our power. We haven't found our ways to make a positive difference. Now, it's only going to happen. We have to educate ourselves to the tradition, first of all. When Tom Murray and I have been having many meetings about this TV thing and so on, what became clear to us is that the creative people that could produce the kind of programs that we want, for the most part, don't have a clue, even if they're Catholic, don't have a clue about what the Catholic tradition is all about. No, so where does that leave us? That means what we want to do is help educate them to that. So that would be, the first thing that we have to do. And with our young people, I mean, we just have not done a good job of passing on the Catholic heritage. We haven't done that, despite people like you who teach in high school and work at it really hard and do a good job. But overall, we haven't done what we should do. Now, we have to find ways to do that better. Always with the social consciousness. I remember some of our students going down to Appalachia and building homes for poor people and so on. And the importance of saying, boy, that's really good. Coming back and maybe having a discussion of it. You helped out that person there. But every one of those students sitting in the room is going to have a lot more power someday. That's nice, they build a home. But every one of them will have some opportunities in their life to make more of a structural, institutional difference. All of them who have kids, for example. All of them who have kids will have the opportunity of helping their kids to recognize that they have social responsibilities. And that you can't just take from this affluent society. And some of them will become CEOs. And it's not just the CEOs, it's everybody. They're all going to be influential in some way. They need to know that there's a body of Catholic social teaching, that there's a whole outlook on family life and respect for life and the peace and unions and the economy, a body of knowledge created by the Catholic community that could guide them in their decisions. So we have to do better on that. And then the counterexample is, I know heads of corporations who have been just the opposite of what you said, who brought a humanistic approach to their work, who have recognized the dignity of the people who work with them, who think about profit, not just as moving up the socioeconomic ladder, but as the breath, the air for the corporation that gives people jobs and helps them raise their families and creates more wealth in the society. I know people like that. So there are counterexamples to what you have said. And I think, again, we're probably looking for the politicians who can enunciate a consistent ethic of life. They haven't known how to do it. No, they haven't. I think of Geraldine Ferraro. I remember trying to get to Geraldine and to suggest there was another way for her to handle the abortion question and the way she said, which was essentially, my private faith has nothing to do with public policy. That's the Kennedy line. We have to disavow the approach of John Kennedy, the one who signaled our making it in the culture. That we can't abide the Kennedy approach, that my religion has absolutely nothing to do with public policy, nothing to do with how we shape our world. We can't allow that. There was another ground for Catholic politicians. I remember writing an article in NCR trying to suggest that and try to get that idea around, which largely was a question. It's the position enunciated here that the middle ground is to say that even if we're not ready for an amendment at this time or public policy, that we do have an obligation to try to shape the mentality, obligation to try to find persuasive arguments, to draw more people into an understanding of the respect for life, consistent ethic of Bernardine. So that we have to, your comment just, to me, reminds us of the great work we have to do. And we haven't done well. We haven't. We're in power. And affluence. And the affluence of the Catholic community is astounding. We got a building here. This was a $7 million project at least. We moved in here debt-free and never borrowed a penny. If you can show Catholics that their hard-earned money and the affluence they've got can make a difference, I think they're ready to support it. Tom Murray and I believe there's a certain number of Catholics who you need a lot of money to produce these programs like we want to produce. Creative, good Catholic programs, get the Catholic spiritual tradition, get it on network television, or public television. It takes a lot of money. The question is, will there be Catholics around who understand that and will come forth to support it? And my own sense is that if people can see how their affluence and money can make a difference, they'll support it. I believe people supported this whole project here because they believe and know that the collegians here, if they get a spiritual base, that they will be better citizens, they'll be better parishioners, they'll be better leaders in church and society in the future. That's what I believe. And instead of just talking in an idealistic realm, I say they did it. I can point to this place and say, the Catholics supported this because they understood that argumentation. I use that all the time because it's what takes me out of the realm of being an ivory tower theologian. Now, I usually start my talks by saying, I raised $7 million, now listen to me. Joanne?
I realize that you and I are the generation of citizens that have the opportunity think that's the problem. They may be Catholic, and they have been baptized in that first communion. But those kids that are 19 and 20 are not going to church and not really part of the church anymore. I wish they're not. I can see in our era, we stayed in the church.
Yes.
They're not going to be able to prevent that.
That's the loyalty. The comment is made essentially that the Catholic education, which would help us, is now not affordable for many Catholics. And therefore we're deprived of that, and the jump was made then to the point of saying that we've lost the loyalty. Now, I just sort of parse that out a little bit and say that, I mean, it's true, it's a financial burden for many Catholics. However, there's lifestyle questions involved. The often quoted statistic is that Protestants give 2.2% of their income to the church and Catholics give 1.1%. Catholics give half to the church what Protestants do, living in the same affluent culture. And it's not just connected with schools, because if you take the cohort that doesn't have kids in school, either because they're too young or their kids are all out of school already, we're still giving half to charities of what Protestants are. So the idea that and yet we know we're the most affluent people around. Factoring out the Hispanic Catholics who have not yet made it in the mainstream. So the pure argument that says, I mean, that it's not affordable, I'm not sure is really true. I mean, there's lifestyle questions and how much you're going to sacrifice for this good of sending kids to school and that. And I mean, I know there's individuals who can't make ends meet, and there's two people working in a family. Obviously, you can point to all kind of cases like that. I'm trying to generalize the point. Then I would just like to take the other half of it. The fact that we don't have institutional loyalty, I don't think can be put just at the door of the fact that kids are not in Catholic schools. It's always been a tiny minority of Catholics who have gone to Catholic colleges, for example. Always has been a tiny minority. Most of our people are educated in state universities, public institutions, and so on. I believe that the question of loyalty is connected in with the cultural attitude here of these loose connections with institutions, these porous institutions, and a whole culture that's a disposable culture. Doesn't work, throw it away, buy something new. And there we're dealing with deep value questions and how we raise our kids. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of parents who feel, in retrospect, they gave their kids too much, made it too easy. I always think of John Savage. His great line was, I'm trying to work like crazy to give all my money away so none of the kids will get any of it. I mean, that was his idea. Don't give it to them. It's a big mistake. Don't give it to them. And then you got other people saying, well, they got to have the opportunity for school, and they'll get behind and so on, and I want to make that opportunity. So no simple answers to that. But it does go back to the child-rearing questions and larger cultural questions of why we have porous institutions and loose connections and lack of loyalty. But we Catholics are like everybody else in this today. Everybody's fighting. It's not just a Catholic problem. Yeah.
Grade school and high school curriculum for Catholics this particular year. Kids graduate and go to college, I feel that they learn a whole lot more about social problems.
Yeah.
They get a lot of beautiful things.
A question is asked about curriculum in grade school and high school, and the observation made that the students going through all that in Catholic schools know more sociology than they know theology, so on. I'm not going to comment on a local situation. I really don't know it. But in general, I'm happy to comment because I think that's been a major failure since the Second Vatican Council. And I got collegians who will say they're upset. Some evangelicals come up and want to know if they want to know something about the Bible, and they don't know it. And they want to know, I went through all these Catholic schools, how come I don't know anything about the Bible? So it's very real. It's a very real problem. And I think we made fundamental mistakes after the Second Vatican Council. And I must say that I was consistently on the other side of this argument, and always saying the classroom is for teaching. The classroom, religion classes should be taught in an academically sound way, objectively. Religion classes are not for evangelizing. They're not for prayer. They're not for doing other things. I don't mean you can't pray for the class, that's what I mean, but they're not. Religion classes, as taught in Catholic schools, should have an academic content. It should have, people should, when they walk out of those classes, they should know something. Now, there's another thing. The school itself creates an atmosphere that is spiritual, and their retreats will do good things for them, and their service projects. But they should know something when they come out. They should know the Bible. They should know about the saints. They should know about the major theological trends. That's what we're lacking totally. We're dealing with religiously illiterate people. And therefore, they can't withstand the attacks of the evangelicals, the fundamentalists. They can't, not equipped to respond. They don't know the scriptures well enough and so on. So I'm on the side and have been consistently through the 60s and 70s on teaching in the classroom. You have to have grades and you have to pass tests on this Gospel of Matthew and what you should know about it and so on.
I just want to say that I think that what you were just saying about, not only about the teaching, that's why I've been envisioning throughout the whole process, was just we need parents who have that, so that if they can't go to Catholic schools, they need at least raise their children like that at home. It's got to start in the home, and it's got to continue to grow, and people have to continue to be able to have enough interest in lectures like this, and just it starts in the family.
Yeah, let me comment on that. We better think of a time limit here so that people can gauge their energy level. We're ending no later than midnight. For sure. Let's realistically say we won't go past 9:15. How's that? If people got to go now, go. That's a good idea to leave. But 9:15, we'll stop then. Suzanne's comment is great importance of the family and parents being able to pass on the religious heritage to their kids in the home. And I think that's part of the way we're going to solve our problem is through adult education, through parents becoming more knowledgeable about the faith and being able to teach it to their kids. It's one normal, natural way it could happen. So it suggests that when we look at the overall effort, that we have to do more adult education so parents feel comfortable in doing that. And I think that takes creativity. I know parents who have done it. They might read together with the kids or watch a television program with the kids and then discuss it afterwards. In other words, it doesn't mean that the mother becomes an expert on Rahner and gives an hour lecture on Rahner every day. I mean, there's ways of doing this. And television and watching and commentary and discussion might be one of the ways to go about that. Or coming to church together and discussing the liturgy or the homily. Ways of getting across those ideas that are more palatable and probably better done with the young people anyway. Yes?
I understand that people should learn facts about their religion, but you really do need some passion. I learned all the things in my religion, and where I found out I needed to get was some passion about what I was doing. So, and the second thing that I was thinking is that the people who don't have families, we have to have an avenue for them also.
Youngsters without families? Oh. No. Yes. Surely part of our problem. The point is made about we need passion as well as knowledge. And I don't necessarily see those things as sequential or opposed. One would hope that one grows up with religious experience, with passion that one gets from in the family circle and from celebrating the liturgy and from a lot of retreats. We've done well with retreats. High school retreats are often very good. Many places have had very successful collegiate retreat experiences. I think that's very often where passion comes. They're with others and it's revved up and they like it and they get engaged in it and so on. That's the proper place for that. But Jacques Maritain said something I quote often. What we need in people in the modern world is tender hearts and tough minds. And one without the other isn't going to work. What we got to do is produce people with passion. I like your word. Produce people with passion for the religion who have an experience of the Lord, who have some experiential base for what this is all about, and are able to speak intelligently about it, and who understand it, and who are in a process of understanding it in greater depth. To articulate, need people with tough minds and tender hearts, with passion and with knowledge. So I don't want to divorce those two. In fact, I think learning, the good teachers that I know find a way to get people to be passionate about the topic. And there's no reason why one can't be passionate about theological learning. I happen to think it's one of the most exciting things that happens. I remember when I was taking a theology course from Gabriel Moran in New York. It was the theology of Revelation, and it was that massive snowstorm in New York, and he was teaching at Manhattan College. I was living right near Fordham. And all day long my mind was thinking, how am I going to get there to class? I think I'll walk. I'm going to walk to get there.
I mean, I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. There was a sister who sat next to me and who slept. And that was always a great enigma to me. How you could be in this exciting theological atmosphere and fall asleep. I couldn't understand that. But anyway, to me, theology was passionate. I mean, I wouldn't have, I mean, missed class would be the farthest thing from my mind. I could never imagine that. The excitement of learning. Learning, theology, the Anselm's definition is faith-seeking understanding. The passion of faith seeking understanding. I can tell I'm going to use your word a lot in the future. Passion, that's right. That's what it's about. We got to get passionate about all this. That's my friend Tom Murray's passionate about getting the Catholic tradition into the home and television. He's passionate about it. He's just consumed with it. We've got to make this happen. Think of that. If we had quality television programming coming in, and you could sit there and watch it. I didn't answer the rest of your thing. Everybody in the culture, obviously, I mean, has their role and their contribution to make. The regeneration of family life is important, and some of the people who don't have families have their own ways to contribute.